Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October installment of our Vice Chancellor's virtual reading group. Today, we have up for discussion Tsitsi Dangarembga's This Mournable Body, the third novel in her, I guess we can say, her trilogy now on Tambudzai's Sigauke. We will be led by our Vice Chancellor, Professor Tshilidzi Marwala. My name is Dr. Victoria J. Collis-Buthelezi, and I will be the moderator. So I will hand over to you, Professor Marwala.
Thank you very much, Dr. Collis-Buthelezi, for facilitating this session. And I also would like to thank the library for facilitating all the sessions that I had this year. It was a year where I was focusing on African literature. This is obviously one of the last books I'm going to read in this installment on African literature. And next year, we're going to move to another topic. I also would like to thank the people who have joined us today. I hope all of you have read the book so that our discussion can be enriched. When I was a PhD student at the University of Cambridge, many, many years ago, you would imagine that a person with as much white hair as I do, this was a long time ago, it was in 2000, almost 22 years ago, The Economist had a cover article titled, Hopeless Continent. It was a humiliating article that cited the wars in Sierra Leone, floods in Mozambique, and land invasions in Zimbabwe. As a proud African, I found it difficult to wake up that day and face anyone. As I meekly walked into the dining hall, my friend Dr. Fabian Wagner from Germany politely asked me, and I quote, "What can we do to help your continent?" I replied that the only help we would require is to pressurize his government to not be a conduit of resource pillage in Africa. 2 decades later, Africa still loses a lot of money through illicit trade, exploitation, and plain theft. Nonetheless, this episode made me very nervous of my condition, if I were to quote Tsitsi. It was as if the whole of Cambridge was looking at me and I was a poster child for the hopeless continent. In 2018, I hosted Tsitsi Dangarembga, the author of The Mournable Body, for the Mr. Annual Lecture, where she spoke about her much talked about debut novel, Nervous Conditions. The story is set in pre-independent Zimbabwe and centers around Tambudzai. I'm talking about now the Nervous Conditions. Tambudzai was born in a poor village and lives with her parents, Jeremiah and Mainini. Tambudzai, also shortcut, we're going to use Tambu, is an interesting name. When I ask people from Zimbabwe, they tell me that Tambudzai means trouble. But Tambudzai is not a noun. It is actually a verb. And they agree that it is a verb. In fact, I found out that indeed the word Tambudzai is actually quite identical to the same word in my own language, Tambudzani. And what it literally means, it means make him or her suffer. Of course, if you're going to be making someone suffer, then there is obviously trouble. Tambu's life represents the individual behind the post-colonial violence that ravaged Zimbabwe. In a way, her story represents the trauma that fundamentally becomes ingrained in a country's people. Often, Zimbabwe is dismissed. It represents the quintessential failure of African governance in the West. But what are the ramifications of this narrative for Zimbabwe's people and for the individual? Zimbabwe's history has certainly been fraught. The legacy of British colonial rule, a violent liberation struggle, and dashed hopes of independence when the liberator Robert Mugabe turned out to be a despot. Here, Dangarembga weaves an intricate tale around Tambu. The story begins with a brother Namo, who went to a mission school and stayed with his uncle Baba Mukuru and his family. When Namo dies, Tambu effectively takes his place and becomes close to her cousin Nyasha. She excels at school and enjoys the relative wealth of her uncle, but remains nervous about her surroundings. This first installment of this series, like its sequels, explores gender relations, patriarchy, and colonialism. The sequel to The Nervous Conditions is the Book of North. In this sequel, which is set in the 1970s, Tambu's sister joins the Chimurenga, or the uprising, and ends up in Mozambique, where she loses her leg. And the way this loss of the leg is visually described in this installment is so vivid, the part hanging on the tree. In stark contrast to a sister who was in Mozambique fighting in the war for independence, Tambu wins a scholarship to Sacred Heart College, where she tries to adopt Western ways of life and attempts to distance herself as much as possible from a rural life. Dangarembga explores the other side of making it out of your context, which is not always the rosy picture it is painted as. Here, Tambu encounters discrimination based on race. For example, she's put in the African hostel, and when she graduates at the top of her class in the O-levels, the school chooses to put Tracy, a white girl, on the honor roll instead of her. In the third installment, which is the current book, and which is set in the 2000s, Tambu moves in with Mama Nyanga, the elderly widow of a man who made his fortune after independence. She is joined by the widow's niece, Christine, who knew her family in the village. Tambu navigates the challenges of adulthood and trying to find her purpose. She eventually gets a job as a biology teacher, even though she is trained in the social sciences. As a teacher, she becomes greatly disturbed by the sugar daddies phenomenon that were exploiting the young girls of the school. For those of us who have been dealing with the welfare of young people, especially young girls, we are familiar with the sugar daddies phenomenon. And it can be explained by poverty. Whatever the explanation that we can give, it is wrong, and it is something that we have to fight with all our resources. While she records their number plates, these sugar daddies, to report them to the police, she is contending with powerful men who are respected in their communities. And remember, these are school children. So, in a way, statutory rape is part of the relationship between these sugar daddies and these young girls. This sugar daddy phenomenon leads to Tambo embodying the violence she has so vehemently objected to. In frustration, and as a prelude to a mental breakdown, she beats up one of the students, Elizabeth, to the point that she loses one of her ears. Tambo ends up in hospital where she interacts with other patients, many of them white. Once again, we visit race relations, an insurmountable patriarchy and gender disparity through Tambo. When Tambo is released, she goes and stays with her cousin, Nyasha. Her German husband, Leon, and their 2 children. Here, Tambo experiences a clash of civilizations. On a family outing, Tambo runs into an ex-colleague, Tracy Stevenson, from an advertising agency where she used to work. They decided to work together to establish Green Jacaranda Gateway Safaris. Here, she competes with Pedzi, who came up with Getaway, but was forced out of the farm by the military veterans during the land invasions. Tambo comes up with the village eco, which is based in a village, and here she works with the Women's Club. In establishing the village eco, she has to bribe people, including, in inverted commas, opening and closing people's mouth. Vuramuromo and Valamuromo. Of course, for those of us who are familiar with the sub-Saharan African culture, we will know that Vuramuromo is not associated with corruption. Vuramuromo is basically a phenomenon that is predominant when young man who is in love with a woman sends his family members to the woman's place to get married. And when they arrive there, they have to open the mouth of the prospective in-laws. But here in this book, this phenomenon of Vuramuromo, a beautiful phenomenon in our culture, is associated with corruption. I'm not going to talk about Vuramuromo, which is basically to make sure that whatever has been decided there is not talked about. We don't have this in our culture. You see, this phenomenon does not exist. When a young man's family goes to his prospective wife's family, they will open the mouth but they will not close the mouth, because at the end of the ceremony, they become one family that ought to communicate all the time for the rest of their lives. Now, going back to the book, at the launch of this village eco, while the women of the village were dancing half naked for the tourists, a German tourist takes a picture of Tambu's mother, prompting her to damage the camera, and the tour becomes a disaster. And I suppose, in my own perspective, this book, The Mournable Body, perhaps got that title specifically from this incident, where people have to dance in order to assure their livelihood. Not only do they have to dance, but they have to dance half naked. And I think because of that, this title, certainly in my mind, emerges. Of course, after this disaster, Tambu resigns. The book ends with Tambu taking a job with Christine and their aunt in AK security, while her sister, a war veteran, is still waiting for a prosthetic leg because of the leg that she lost almost 30 years ago, 20 years ago then, in the war for independence. Now, what lessons can we learn from this book? As Jacques Mallet Dupin said about the French Revolution, and I quote, like a Satan, the revolution divorces its children, close quote. And if you look at the struggle of particularly Tambu's sister, she was being devoured by the revolution in which she was an active participant. As Tsitsi puts it, revolutionaries are destroyers and not builders. And after they have won their independence, the first thing they do is to destroy other revolutionaries. We have witnessed this time and time again. For example, we have witnessed this during the reign of terror after the French Revolution, when Maximilien Robespierre killed his comrades with the guillotine, not long after he declared the inspiring words, liberty, equality, and fraternity. We also witnessed this after the Russian Revolution, when Joseph Stalin killed his comrades, including Leon Trotsky and Sergei Kirov. Stalin was so effective at killing his comrades that he had them removed from pictures. They appeared with him long before digital editing made editing people out easy. In China, during the Cultural Revolution, many were victims of purges, including such gallant and remarkable leaders. And here I am talking about the maker of the modern China, Deng Xiaoping. We also learned that a revolution requires technical know-how to achieve. Independent Zimbabwe has not been able to create a safe environment for its people. Consequently, Zimbabwe has the largest diaspora in South Africa, with estimations as high as 40% having left the country. Recently, a prominent Zimbabwean professor, Sabelo Ndlovu Gacheni, left the continent to settle in Germany. No country, least of all one experiencing economic hardship, such as Zimbabwe, can afford to lose scholars of the caliber of Sabelo. So the second principle of revolutionary success is to preserve skills and talent. Anything else will compromise the economy and ultimately lead to its prolonged contraction. Another lesson I draw from this book is that as Africans, we are often required to have double identities. Some of us might live in fancy suburbs such as Sandton, yet we claim to still come from our villages, such as Dutuni for my case. Tambu was living a double life, one which is based on a missionary education and the other a village life. This double life often leads to alienation, where people such as Namo and Tambu are alienated from their cultures. The final lesson I draw is that even though education seems to be a ticket to modernity, it often leads to the existence of nervousness. This manifests as an inferiority complex and an urge to explain or rationalize the failures of modern Africa. Words like legacy, colonialism, and apartheid are often evoked even to explain things that with a bit of effort can be overcome. Though we are seemingly only navigating Tambu's chaotic life, it is juxtaposed against a much broader debate. What is the dark underbelly of independence, or even observing your narrative and becoming successful? Tambu's intricate tale is a realization that this often comes at a price and that the fragments of a country's past linger. It is a tale of the anxiety that comes with colonial education, with a revolution, and with a dream deferred of liberation. Memories of the war are like a void. The patriarchal violence remains unchallenged, and she is confronted with the overwhelming realization of her own failures when she is not able to make something of herself. As Tambu puts it, and I quote, "You are concerned, you will start thinking of ending it all, having nothing to carry on for, no home, no job, no sustaining family bonds. Thinking this induces a morass of guilt." Thank you very much. Ngiyabonga, bayadanki.
Thank you so much, Prof, for contextualizing the novel for us and giving us quite a lot to work with and think through. Listening to you, I mean, there's several things that you said that, I mean, all of what you said, I think we need to spend some time with, but there's several things that stood out for me. So almost before I get to, there's some questions I had. I wonder if we can think through one, the place of patriarchy in the novel, which you point to, and the relationship between patriarchy and decolonization. I also wonder if we can't think through what exactly the second person is doing in the novel, right? So much, the novel unfolds in the second person. And if we think about this as the third installment that's written and published at a time where there's quite a significant amount of time away from the revolutionary moment, right? And you've really pushed us to think about what it is that revolutions and revolutionaries do. How does the second person fit into that? Constantly referring to the you, Right. So it's almost as though, as much as it is so much a novel about one person's breaking down and potential building back up, and that's connected to the fate of Zimbabwe, but we are also conscripted into that almost ethically as readers whenever we read that use. So I wonder if we couldn't talk about those two things.
No, thank you very much. I mean, the first one is obviously quite a difficult one. Young girls being exploited by this old man. These are girls. They're in high school, so they probably are 15, 16, 17. Very difficult. And it becomes difficult when some people link it to our culture. I don't think these are cultural issues. I think these are individual choices that are made by unethical men. I think that is very important. And the second thing that comes out in this book, the voices of women are louder than the voices of men. I don't know whether I don't know whether it makes sense. When she goes back to a village for this eco tourism company, it's the women, it's the women that are at play, and these are not pushovers. These are women that and there is a scene where somebody was referring to her as somebody who has gone out of the village and made a great deal of a life for herself. And this woman, I think that's the leader of the women's club that she was negotiating with in order to establish this eco village. He says, no, there's nothing special about you who have left. We're just as capable here. So that I couldn't, obviously it was written by the principal, the protagonist here is a woman, but the dominance of women in this novel is actually quite apparent. And I guess the way to explain it is that very often when we think of women, we think of people who are victims, especially in Southern Africa. We think of women as victims, as people who are discriminated against. And I must confess, all these are true. But when I think of women, I think of people who are taking care of their household much more effectively than their male counterparts. I think of people who are forming things, pillars of the society. Like, for example, in my own village, for a long time, we had something called a burial society. Very, very important. It was not formed by men. The leaders are not men. The leaders are women. And in fact, when I try to think of the roles that the men in my village play, I do actually run short of things that I can be able to see. My village might be different because the chief of my village is not a man. The chief of my village is a woman. So, and in our culture, when we see our chief, we have to go down on our knees. So I would have been used to that of going down on my knees whenever I see my chief, And I think that's one thing that we actually need to reflect on. The fact that women are pillars, increasingly pillars of our communities. What does it mean in the long-term fight against gender-based violence, against gender discrimination, and so on and so forth? Now, when I come to the second issue, speaking in the second, I did not know what to make out of this. I come from Limpopo, so I can claim that that Zimbabwean Shona culture is probably extends all the way to the part of South Africa where I come from. That is why many of the names, Pedzi, Tambudzai, it almost just sounds like names that could have just been taken out of my village. Normally, in this culture, that used to be the Great Zimbabwe, it used to extend all the way to the Kruger National Park, almost the middle of the Kruger National Park. When you speak to somebody in the second person, you are not particularly impressed about that person. You are not particularly impressed. Like, for example, they will say, instead of saying, you left the house and come back after midnight, they will say, he leaves the house and come back after midnight. And that is supposed to be much more incisive and much more, much more impactful than saying you, So I don't know whether that had anything to do with that, but it was very interesting. It's actually the first book I read where you are speaking in second person. Normally somebody is describing someone, or somebody is first person where somebody is describing their life themselves. This second person, I must confess, I'm an engineer. It's the first time I've actually encountered it. Thank you.
But Prof, I think I'm going to push you a bit, because that the engineer, what you gave for us, maybe we need to ask you to join the department. the reading you gave of the novel. So you really sort of gave us a phenomenal breadth of how to think of the novel and how it's located in relation to the other two. So I almost want to think with you for a bit about what Dangarembga is doing with the second person, because if I remember the other two novels, Nervous Conditions, I think, is in the first person, and The Knot is in the third person. So almost a way in which at this stage, when, Nervous Conditions, here's this very young person who really, part of the way that the nervousness is both the nervousness of moving towards independence, decolonization, the decolonization movement, but it's also a young girl, right? And in fact, part of what Tambu's doing is in this Mournable Body is actually seeing other girls like who she was in Nervous Conditions. So I just wonder what we make of this move from first person, where she's coming into realization of who she is, to this novel where she's in some ways accusing herself. It's it's phenomenal. Just the way you've asked us to think about this mournable body in relation to the other two. The other question I had is, well, I have a few more, but every time you speak, you make me want to go in another direction because you're generating other questions for me. So I'm going to put one that I had before in with something that your comments really, really resonated with or brought to the surface for me. So the one is, I was struck on rereading this by the second person, but also that there's this turn to tourism, because at present I'm teaching Jamaica Kincaid's A Small Place, where it's all, she's talking about tourism in the post-colonial context. And all of these issues of race, identity, because you have that relationship between Tracy and Tambu that comes up again in this novel, and how one pulls in the quote unquote community, what one thinks one is doing in relation to the community versus what the community sees itself as doing, and the power relation. So when you spoke about Tambu's mother's response, I think that's such a powerful moment. And the women saying, well, actually, hold on. We don't need you to come in and work or speak for us. So just thinking through how those power relations come in through tourism. So Zakes Mda also does this, works with the tourism and the idea of the eco village. So I'm just taking your invitation to think of the novel, as you say, as sort of being of Zimbabwe and about Zimbabwe, but also a Southern African novel. The other, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I were to go back to the issue of the second person and say, how do I put it succinctly about why does he use the second person? I would say it's because she has not been impressed with herself. So she does not want to take ownership of herself. She almost presents herself as outside her own mournable body. That's what I would say, in summary. And then when it comes to tourism, I mean, I'll go back now, not to Tambu. I'll go back to Tsitsi herself. Tsitsi is clearly somebody who is very disappointed with the way things have turned out in Zimbabwe. If I'm not mistaken, she was in jail a few weeks ago. And by the way, this book is shortlisted for the Booker Prize. That's why I chose it. It's very interesting. The reason why I'm very proud of this reading session that I've done is that we actually took 3 books from Southern Africa. Because they're South Africans. Most of the books that we read are from West Africa. Most of the books that we are familiar with are from West Africa. I have not even read Zakes Mda. So it's very interesting that the 3 books that I have read in this session are from Southern Africa. So that is actually quite exciting. So she is an activist, and I think she has a dim view of the economy that is based on either exploiting the resources of the continent or the culture of the continent. I'll give you an example. People coming to game reserves to shoot our animals. People coming to our villages. And by the way, now I'm speaking from a personal perspective. When I was growing up, and there will be tourists that will come to basically watch us. And the vivid memory of this was when I was a PhD student at Cambridge. And before the advent of smartphones. And I'm at Heathrow Airport before I even checks out. And they have pictures, of people. They have a picture of people in Vietnam. They have pictures of people, huge posters of people. And then they have this picture of young boys. And these young boys must have been like 6 or 7. And then it's written, 1978, young boys in South Africa playing soccer in a village, Dutuni, where I come from. And I'm trying to look at these people. I cannot recognize them. I'm supposed to recognize them. Obviously, it is. This must have been 1999. So this probably was 20 years later, but I couldn't recognize the people at all. If there was a camera, I could have taken the picture and take it home and say, who are these people? So, and then you say, and then you realize that this is an exploitative economy. These young people the pictures were taken without their permission. There is a certain degree of ownership of these tourists of what they see. And here it is demonstrated by this German guy, Bachmann, I think his name is Bachmann, who basically just starts taking pictures. Now, you can't just take pictures of people without, and I suppose it's one of the things that Tsitsi is disappointed about.
I wonder if, I'm just thinking back to something that you had said about quoting Tsitsi Dangarembga, that revolutionaries are not builders, but destroyers. And Tambu's sister, the very vivid and visceral representation of her leg as something consumed, eaten, devoured by the revolution. How you took us through the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, Cultural Revolution. If we were to think about what we're meant to learn from the novel, revolutionary moments, because you'd asked us what lessons can we learn from this book? What do we, as the you of the novel, the readers, what can we take from this novel in this moment? If you understand what I'm saying, that
absolutely.
We're in a global moment. We're in South Africa at a particular point. It just feels like everywhere we're just standing on the precipice of something. And I wonder if there's something that the novel has to teach us.
No, for me, what I can take from this novel is that we have to be agents of our own futures. We have to be drivers of our own future. And I know when you start doing that, you can easily fall into individualism in its worst form. We have to when I go to Soweto and I walk around and I get into people's houses, and the houses look beautiful and very clean, and get out just at the gate and it is dirty. You have dirt that has just been piled and so on and so forth. And then you ask, what is wrong? And then you are told that the municipality has not come and picked the dirt. Okay, fine. If it was inside a bin, I would understand, but much of it is outside the bin. And this is the whole idea of thinking that the solutions to our own problems are going to come from elsewhere. They are going to come with eco-tourists who are going to come and visit our village, and so on and so forth. It's actually quite, I think it's a very powerful thing that we need to take away. And especially as South Africans, where you basically have a system of governance that is trying to create a welfare state, where things that we could actually do, we can no longer be able to do. I think one of them, if I were to speak on my personal view, we never really had a high school until I was almost ready to go to high school. It sounds interesting that the first high school was established the year I went to high school, but that was the case. But I remember when the high school was built, every house had to give 20 rands. 20 rands is nothing. It can't even buy you anything today, But this was in I think this must have been 1984, 83, when the idea came about. And you can imagine how much the people in the village took pride of the high school. They couldn't, you wouldn't dare vandalize a high school like that, because everybody has paid for it, Now we hear that there was a protest and a building has been banned at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. The minister is rightfully angry about it and saying the arsonist must be arrested. And I think this book is saying that this is what happens when you think that the solutions to your problems are going to come from elsewhere, from tourists. Don't look there because they come there as exploiters, and so on and so forth.
I'd see there's a comment, and it actually ties in quite well with what you've just said, but also something you had said earlier. I'm going to read the comment. Tambudzai is a complex character, bitter, not particularly likable, with inner demons that threaten to derail her. But this is what makes the novel compelling. It's unpredictable, and you can't help but feel that Tambudzai is always about to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And this ties in, I think, quite powerfully to what you were saying in terms of this is what happens when you think that your solutions are going to come from elsewhere. And just thinking back to where you started when discussing patriarchy in the novel and the voice of women in the novel, that you were saying that women have the loudest or the greatest voice in the novel. And as you were saying that, what struck me was that what you were asking us to hold and what the novel is asking us to hold is the complexity or the duality of patriarchy and gender-based violence existing and being real. But at the same time, women constantly asserting agency in response to that, refusing to accept that solutions will come from elsewhere. And I thought that was so powerful in what you were saying. I wonder if you don't want to.
No, I think you have put it very, very well. I wouldn't want to spoil it. you have absolutely put it very well. You know. And then I can see. Would you please comment on the place of the personal, the familial, and the national in Zimbabwean fiction? It always seems that the three terms enjoy a central place in Southern African literature. Look, Professor Mngadi, I will have to put it up front that my reading of Southern African literature is indeed very, very limited. For some reason, I have not read as much literature of Southern Africa as I would have. So the personal, the family, and the national are very, very important. And I suppose part of the reason is because the bitter wars of independence were fought much more bitterly in Southern Africa than in any other part of the African continent, of sub-Saharan Africa now. You know. Because if you look in East Africa, it was only in Kenya where there was vigorous wars for independence. Tanzania, almost nothing happened there. Uganda, not really. You know, independence was almost, you know. Then if you go to West Africa, I mean, you can't even tell me, you will be hard pressed to tell me a struggle hero in Nigeria. I mean, tell me one struggle hero in Nigeria. You are not going to see much of that because when after the Second World War, I think it was just a question of time before the British handed over Nigeria back, and that's what exactly happened. Whereas if you come to Southern Africa, you come from, you go to Mozambique. Wars for independence, where individuals many times were acting against the wishes of their own families and sometimes the wishes of their own communities. Because we tend to think that all these people, when they went to exile, everybody at home was saying, hey, go and fight for us. No, many of them, when they left, their mothers were not eating for months, saying, I've lost my child. I don't know where he has gone. And as a result, the question of the personal, the family, and the community there's always an interplay in our history, especially the colonial and the post-colonial history. And if you go to Angola, the bitter wars that were fought in Angola, the bitter wars that were fought in Namibia. Of course, there were no wars in Lesotho, there were no wars in Botswana, there were no wars in Swaziland. The bitter wars that were fought in Zambia. Not in Zambia, there were no wars in Zambia, but in Zimbabwe. Nothing in Mozambique, in Malawi. No, thanks.
Thank you, Prof. I'm not sure if you see there's another question, a set of questions that have come in. Can we say that this Mournable body is a novel about respect, examining its worth, what it should mean, self-respect, respect for women, for the post-colonial state?
I wouldn't say it's a hard novel of people surviving, of basically a middle-aged woman actually struggling to survive. So I would put it as a book about survival and a struggle to find a space in a society that is increasingly becoming complex, rather than on the much more peaceful concepts such as respect. In fact, I would say this is not even about that, because it's either your culture is going to be exploited, or the young girls are being exploited, or Nyasha and her group of women trying to survive. It's a brief story, but it was there. Corporal punishment of Nyasha's child at school, meted through violence. So it is a hard book for more than a book about respect.
Professor Marwala, thank you so much for taking us through this novel. I see there's another question that has come in, but I think we've hit our time. So maybe what I will do is just extend sincere thank yous to UJ's library team, Reneke Pandey, Alrina de Bruin, and also thank, save the best for last, thank Professor Marwala for setting this up and for taking us through such a phenomenal novel and difficult novel, as you've rightly pointed out. To my understanding, this is the last session for the year. And what a session it has been. So Prof, if you want to let us know what the genre will be for 2021, and if you want to attend to the last question, thank you so much for this.
No, thank you very much. I will still have one more book in November. And next year, I am going to go back to technology. The Structure of Scientific Thinking is the book that, The Structure of Scientific Thinking, Thomas Kuhn is the first book I'm going to read next year. The Structure of Scientific Discovery or something like that, where he introduces the concept of the paradigm shift. So that is where we are going to go. And then the question here, this particular person who is asking this question is actually my PhD student, so I'm going to answer him. Joshua, I am going to answer you that question. I know you are very passionate about integrating African characteristics in your work. Joshua published a paper on a new AI algorithm that is called Urimisana. Urimisana means to plow together, and motivated by the theory of Ubuntu. I had never really seen somebody writing a paper about Ubuntu with so many mathematical equations. So thank you very much. I hope to see you in November when we do the last book for the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. And thank you everyone for attending. This was phenomenal.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.